Today, we're going back to, well, it depends on your point of view, really, either all the way back to 33 AD or to some rather more obscure point in the Middle Ages.
Signore pietà. Cristo pietà.
At first, it was hard to see anything. Then slowly, on the part which showed the front of the body, the bones became quite distinct, like an X-ray. Crossed hands, bones articulated, wrists smashed as if by nails, a long, refined, angular outline to the face.
That's a description of the Turin shroud on rare public display in Turin Cathedral in 1978. The shroud is one of the most revered relics of the Catholic Church, a piece of linen cloth that appears to show the imprint of a man who's been crucified. And many Christians believe it's the ancient cloth that Jesus Christ was buried in.
I was very moved to actually see the thing there and then.
I'm beginning to be very much impressed by arguments that this is, if you like, a supernatural phenomenon, a genuine one, and not a fake in any sense of the term.
For centuries, the shroud has been the focus of intense debate. How and when did the image of a crucified man become imprinted on the linen? But in the late 1970s, the Catholic Church agreed to a test that it was hoped would finally determine whether this could be the shroud of Christ.
Recent pollen tests have proved that this cloth came from the Middle East, and the guardians of the shroud now want a radiocarbon test to establish beyond doubt whether it dates from Christ's day.
It took almost a decade for the Catholic Church to decide on the precise protocol, but by 1988 a method had been agreed on, and the Church selected one scientist to oversee the process.
The other scientists, were finding pollen, it came from the Near East, so it could be the shroud, and, the whole pressure was this could really be the shroud. And so, I just felt that the thing one must do is to do a date.
Professor Michael Tite was at the time keeper of the British Museum Research Laboratory, and he was given the job of coordinating the work of 3 labs chosen by the Church to do the radiocarbon dating. In April 1988, he arrived in Turin for the first step of the process.
The shroud was brought out from the chapel behind the cathedral, and it's very rarely brought out, in fact, laid out on a large table.
And what did you feel like personally? That was the first time, presumably, you'd seen it there
Certainly
directly.
The first time I've seen it, yes. Well, I'm not a believer, so, it didn't mean a great deal to me. I was certainly interested to see it. It's a remarkable image.
And then, so a sample of the shroud was cut. Tell me about that. That must have been quite a difficult and delicate process.
Well, it's taken from the edge, so an unobtrusive area. We did have these 2 textile experts present, so that they were able to examine the whole of the shroud and ensure that this was part of the original shroud and not a repair.
Is it, or is it not, the face of Christ? Yesterday, officials in Turin cut tiny samples of the Turin shroud for scientists to date.
It was cut into 3 pieces, 1 for each of the 3 laboratories, wrapped in metal foil, and then put in a container, a steel container. And my role there was to make certain there was no shady business of swapping the samples.
Right. Was there any concern that there would be some shady business?
No, I don't think so. But, when you're doing something like that, you cover your back in all directions.
This afternoon, 2 scientists from Oxford University returned to London with a small piece of the shroud to start the test. The test will detect the number of radioactive carbon atoms in the gas. The older the cloth, the fewer radioactive atoms it will contain. Once the results are ready, they'll be sent to the British Museum, where they'll be compared with the results from the 2 other laboratories in Arizona and Zurich.
And then I got our statisticians to combine the results and come up with a sort of final number.
The Turin shroud, thought for centuries to be Christ's burial shroud, is a fake. The Roman Catholic Church has said that tests in laboratories in America, Switzerland and Britain show the shroud was made between the years 1260 and 1390.
The Roman Catholic Church has never claimed the shroud is genuine, and they accept the scientists' verdict. But they say the shroud can still be an object of veneration, a symbol of Christ's suffering. At Westminster Cathedral today, there was mixed reaction to the news.
Definitely saddened. I think all Catholics may be a bit sad.
Can I ask you, were you surprised by the news that the shroud is not genuine?
Well, I believe it is genuine. I wouldn't put too much trust in the scientists.
What did you feel when you realised what the date was?
Well, to some extent. It confirmed what one almost what one expected.
Was there any part of you that felt disappointed, that would have wanted the surprise of finding that it did come from the time of Christ and therefore this was something, miraculous?
No. There wasn't any where I thought that. I was just intrigued that, yes, the suspicion was proved.
So you had a press conference to announce this. I mean, what tell me about that. What did that feel like sitting up there before all of those journalists?
Well, I don't know, it was a mistake I made. There was a big blackboard behind it. And I put 1260 to 1390 AD. And then I put an exclamation mark after it. Oh. And that caused me endless trouble. The significance of the exclamation mark was to tell the press, this is what you already knew, because the general date had been circulating in the press for some while. But I mean, all sorts of various things that were read into the exclamation mark, that I was making fun of a church or I was a Freemason or something.
Are you a Freemason?
No. I know nothing about it.
But it wasn't just accusations of a sinister Masonic plot to discredit the church that came to be levelled at the scientists. One suggestion is that the results were skewed because the sample was contaminated, for example, by people touching the shroud over the centuries, or by a fire that occurred in the 1500s. Others believe that the sample came not from the original cloth, but from a much later repair. Professor Tite, though, believes these concerns were addressed in the testing process and that the result was accurate.
There's certain groups who resisted the date and continue to resist the date. I mean, there's a number of people who've made their whole career out of a shroud in one way or another, writing books about it, and so they were slightly put out the fact that it was no longer the real object.
So that does still leave the question. I mean, it's an extraordinary image on a piece of cloth. How did the image then get there, in your opinion?
Well, I think that, there's no real evidence for paint.
So you don't think it was painted on there?
I don't think so. And the other oddity is that if you look at every painting from the Middle Ages and later the Renaissance, they always paint Christ with the nails going through the palm of the hands and through the top of the foot sort of thing. Whereas in reality, if you're going to crucify someone, in order that they stay on the cross, you have to put the nails through the wrist and through the ankles.
And of course, that's the shroud exactly has the nails going through the top of the feet and through the wrist rather than the palm.
That's right.
So, I mean, is it, as far as you're concerned, is it still a mystery? Is it still something that scientists haven't been able to explain?
I think a complete replication of the image hasn't been successfully achieved.
Wow, that's fence sitting.
Okay. I don't believe it's a shroud, but I think it's quite highly probable that there was a body in there. It was a time of the Crusades. A very appropriate way of humiliating a Christian would be to crucify him, like Christ. And I think that's a real possibility. And then the cloth is put over the body, the sort of bodily fluids resulting from the stress of a crucifixion react and cause this discoloration and ultimately a certain degree of decay in the shroud.
And so the impassioned debate about the shroud goes on.